Off. It was a day when a brief shower had fallen. The French woman who appeared before me, having forgotten her umbrella, asked me in an urgent manner where she could buy that thing. She told me that she wanted to buy something completely unfamiliar to me. I was perplexed. My name is Mike Henderson. I'm an older man in my 40s working for a trading company. I've been in this job for a long time, working for more than 20 years now. Thanks to that, I'm decently good at my job and have been blessed with great subordinates. However, getting along with all of them is challenging. Mike, get it together, man. Another input error. This is why it's tough with the less educated, you know. Especially this new recruit this year, James, is quite a formidable foe. He's a graduate of a prestigious university, and he's indeed smart. But his educational elitism is extreme, and he often looks down on me, who only finished middle school. However, it's true that I make a lot of mistakes on the computer. I struggle with digital tasks, so I often make typos like this. Sorry, James. I'll be more careful next time. It doesn't matter. For an uneducated old man like you, it's like talking to a brick wall. You'll just make the same mistakes again. You're incompetent. A report in French is difficult for someone with your level of education, isn't it? James is the son of an executive, and there's a lot of gossip that he's destined for a leadership role in the future. That's why, even though I've been working for 20 years, he looks down on me because I've never made it past the rank of section manager. Of course, I've warned him, and others have reprimanded him too. But he doesn't listen, and gradually everyone else has given up. It's better than being completely ignored, they say, but it's rare for someone to be so ostracized. But he's favored by the company's executives, so I can't provoke him too much. Then one day, while I was racking my brains over how to handle this newbie, darn it, I forgot my umbrella. On my way home, I was caught in a brief shower and took shelter under a nearby building. It looked like it was going to clear up soon, so I thought I'd take a break. I was leisurely watching the sky when a woman ran into the building where I was sheltering from the rain. She had brown hair and pale skin. Furthermore, she had a long nose and beautiful facial features. Having interacted with many Europeans, I had a hunch that she might be from somewhere in France based on her looks. She was drenched and hurriedly pulled a handkerchief out of her bag to dry herself. Then, once she was composed, she took out a mirror and began checking her makeup. Women do wear makeup, after all, and it must be tough when they get wet like this. Oh, what should I do? My makeup is coming off. However, as soon as she looked in the mirror, the woman made a face as if the world was coming to an end. Upon closer inspection, there were freckles on her skin. I'm guessing her makeup was being come off due to the rain, and they had emerged. Darn it, I forgot my makeup kit at the office. Is there a place nearby where I can buy makeup? The woman suddenly started talking to me. She was frantically gesturing, clearly in a rush. When I asked where she was from, she was indeed from France. Because of my job, I could speak French, so I tried to converse with her in French. Makeup. I'm not very knowledgeable, but there's a drugstore nearby where you might be able to buy some. Oh, you can speak my native language. Thank you for letting me know. Would you like me to show you the way? The rain seems to be letting up soon. Really? With that, the woman, Renee, bowed her head in gratitude. Just as we were finishing our talk, the rain stopped, so I took her to the drugstore. She apparently had an important job later, but she left her makeup tools at the office. Wow, this is so nice, and the color is lovely. It seemed Renee liked the cosmetics, and she went straight to the checkout. But the cashier seemed to have trouble understanding French, and I could tell something was going wrong because the checkout was taking longer than usual. I was in line behind Renee because there was something I wanted to buy. Seeing her struggle with the language barrier, I decided I should step in and help. Renee, do you have another card? It seems there's an issue reading this credit card. What? Who must be kidding? That's the only card I have, and I don't carry much cash. Got it. In that case, I'll cover it for you. What? Really? Renee was shocked, but if we kept stalling, she might be late for work. She wasn't buying anything too expensive, so I decided to pay for her, and we finished checking out. I'll definitely give you back the money. Sure. Good luck with your work. I exchanged number with her and saw her off. To be honest, I know it's a risk and people might call me a soft touch. There's a chance the money won't come back. But honestly, the money doesn't matter to me. I just want to help out a person from abroad working in a foreign land. Because of my job, I have many opportunities to interact with people from abroad, so I'm well aware of their hard work. Sure, there are times when cultural differences can lead to discomfort or even cause it. That's why being considerate is so important. A week passed. I was at a popular cafe. For a 40-year-old guy like me, going there alone required some courage, but it was the day I was meeting Renee, so I had to bite the bullet. She diligently kept in touch since our last meeting, and that's how we ended up here. I arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled time, and she was a little late. People here are surprisingly punctual. Weren't you bored arriving 10 minutes early? She seemed very surprised to see me there and said that, "Oh, I don't want you to get the wrong idea." Her comment wasn't meant to be sarcastic or anything like that. In France, being frank is considered a virtue. In fact, in France, they say that the best friends are the ones who are the most straightforward. So, this is not sarcasm, but rather her expressing her feelings based on her own sensibilities. With its unique culture of reading between the lines and modesty, her comment might come off as surprising. I wasn't bored. I was reading a book. Oh, good then. Saying this, she took a seat across from me, looking at her face again. Why is that? Her freckles seem to be a different color. What? You're making a strange face. Is my makeup weird? No, I was just thinking your freckles look a different color. I drew them with the American makeup tools I bought yesterday. It was a brand I had never seen before, but they were easy to use. Just the coloring wasn't great. Not suited for freckles. I tilted my head at her words. Aren't freckles something you get rid of? I'm no expert, but I get the idea of using makeup to hide blemishes or wrinkles. So wouldn't that extend to freckles as well? Are you drawing them on with makeup on purpose? Yes, that's right. In France, we don't get rid of freckles. In fact, people who have them are envied. I was surprised that there are people who try to erase them. I was taken aback by her comment. Sure, I've met French women with freckles, but I never imagined some of them were actually drawing them on with makeup. Language and culture, sure, but even beauty standards, or our values related to beauty, vary greatly by country. French values are interesting. Can I hear more about this? Of course, I can talk about this stuff all day. Although I often talk to foreigners for work, I seldom have the chance to have personal conversations. But understanding a culture means understanding its values and manners. I may not use this information in a business setting, but it's definitely worth knowing. I ended up forgetting my initial goal of getting my money back from Renee, and instead had various discussions with her. Renee is apparently 27 years old this year and works at the US branch of a company. She's been living here for about 2 years and seems to be enjoying it. I also enjoyed talking. Would you like to talk again sometime? Of course, if you don't mind chatting with an old guy like me. I think people here are wonderful and their humility is a virtue, but self-deprecation isn't good. After all, you're amazing. With those last words, I shrugged and parted ways with her. Since then, I started meeting with Renee regularly. Renee herself loves the culture of the US and is still learning. So we taught each other about our native cultures and had a good time. Then, a month later, I was preparing for an important meeting with James. It was our first meeting for new business development, so we planned to prepare meticulously, or so we thought. I'm sorry, James, can you redo the documents you created? What, why? You said you had no complaints about the content. It was at the final stage of the meeting preparations. James clearly resisted my instruction. James was supposed to create the documents for this meeting, but today was the first time I had a chance to go over them. We usually review them in advance, but James said, it's pointless to show them to you, Mike, since you wouldn't understand French documents anyway. It's a waste just to show them to you, haha, and didn't let me see them until they were printed. Well, James is not a newcomer, so I trusted him not to make such a terrible mistake, but the content is fine. But there are many spelling errors. Just from a quick glance, there are several. No way, Mike. Someone with a low level of education like you would only know the standard phrases in French, right? Haha. Besides, People from abroad are more laid back about these things. As long as the meaning gets across, isn't that enough? Haha. Listen here. I think it's problematic to belittle the customer like that. Surprisingly, James clearly frowned at my cash-in. Aren't you ashamed to criticize others when you frequently make typing mistakes on your computer? That's a different story. It's the same, haha. Sore loser, typical idiot, haha. If you insist, why don't you redo it yourself? Better yet, why don't you do the presentation, haha. Then you can point out the mistakes and save us the trouble of redoing the data, haha. Cut it out. It's you who should cut it out, you idiot. Don't tell me what to do, especially when you're still a mere employee at your age, haha. With that, James kicked the desk and swiftly left the floor. I wanted to redo the document, but James had the data. Given his demeanor, he probably wouldn't hand over the data to me. If this meeting fails, I'm sure he plans to shift the blame onto me. This is a problem. I, with my head hung low, reluctantly went into the meeting, manually correcting the spelling errors. But I'm surprised. I never thought I'd see you here. I'm surprised too, Renee. Incredibly, the client representative for today's meeting was none other than Renee. She had her signature freckle makeup on, and in her suit, she looked sharp and intellectual. James was surprised that I knew the representative, but my course of action wouldn't change even if the other party was Renee. Thank you for making time to be here today. There were some inaccuracies in the documents we prepared, and we're correcting them by hand. I handed the documents to Renee and her team, and as soon as she looked at them, a puzzled expression crossed her face. Did you create this document? I was responsible for the final check, but someone else prepared it. There was no point in lying, so I honestly responded. Renee sighed deeply. I thought so. There are terrible spelling mistakes. Moreover, the wording is hard to understand. The person who prepared this needs to study French more, and also the culture. I can't feel any sincerity towards my home country in this document. Please convey this. Yes, I will pass on your feedback. I glanced at James. He was trembling, and his face was beet red. Well, this was due to his lack of study, and he brought this upon himself. It's true that when viewed from a global perspective, the Americans are meticulous and, if put negatively, too detail-oriented. It is understandable to have the impression that foreign countries are more tolerant. But that's not the case with France. It is said that the French consider frankness a virtue, and they themselves are aware that they are often described as complainers. It could be said that it's their culture to complain without malice. About 1 in 4 people vent their stress by complaining, as they say. Moreover, the French often seek negative feedback. Negative feedback tends to lead to personal growth. On the contrary, positive feedback can even be perceived as hypocritical in some cases. That's why they express their thoughts immediately and point out mistakes when they find them. Well, this is more about cultural studies than language learning. So this situation arose because James neglected to study. Sometimes a little tough love is necessary for learning. There's no use in just saying it. So there we were, with James taking feedback on the documents and blushing throughout. Our meeting successfully concluded. James, probably quite embarrassed and enduring much, was silent after the meeting. If he had amended his ways while receiving feedback, it wouldn't have come to this. Well, he's still young. I hope he learns a lot from today's failure. Why haven't you been promoted? Near the end of the workday. That's when James finally broke his silence. Well, my sister has a weak body, so I would refuse overtime so that I could go home early in case anything happened. Now that my sister's married, I can do some overtime, but that's not the only reason. I'm not good with computers either. I laughed and said this. James seemed to want to say something, but remained silent and left. But after that, there were changes in him. First, he started speaking to me in a more respectful tone. It was weird that he hadn't been doing that before, but from my perspective, it was a massive change. Furthermore, he began asking my opinion on various things, like Mike, could you please check this document? I was pretty surprised at first, but while he's a bit arrogant, he's not a fool. He properly acknowledges his faults and learns to avoid repeating them. Young people who do this will definitely go far in the future. Of course, thanks for trusting me. He still has areas to improve, but James's abilities are certainly above mine. He's probably gonna be my boss one day, so I guess I should give him some support to ensure he thrives in the future. I reckon that's part of my duty, being an employee with years of service. So, while James started to come around, a whole lot changed in my personal life too. Mike, I want to marry you. That bombshell came a month after a meeting with Renee. Like always, we were at the cafe, engaging in our little cultural exchange, when, out of nowhere, Renee drops that on me, and I nearly spit out my coffee. I want to marry you, Mike. What about you? Don't you want to marry me? Renee, in her typical demeanor, tilted her head in curiosity. Right, France. It's often called the country of love. The French have a pretty open attitude towards love and relationships. Well, of course, I'd love to. You're an incredible woman, but I'm over 40, you know. Does age matter? It doesn't bother me at all. Even if you were 50 or 60, I'd still want to marry you. Or we could just live together, if you'd prefer. Either way, I just want to be with you. She looked me right in the eye as she said it. Many people in France are in de facto relationships, without any official marriage. But that just wouldn't do it for me. I wouldn't want that, it's a bit lonely. I want to marry you. I thought you'd say something like that. She gave a delighted smile at my answer, and I couldn't help but grin too. Well, if we've settled on that, should we go ring shopping? Oh, but shouldn't we move in together first? Haha, true. I'll have to revise my apartment contract. I'd love to live in a house with a big garden. And just like that, at a fast clip, we were discussing our future together. Of course, not all French folks are this spontaneous. Some take their time. But Renee, based on our past conversations, often takes bold actions. With her, if I dilly-dallied, she wouldn't hesitate to kick my butt. Besides, I have been considering marriage for some time now. But it's not about convenience or practicality. Renee is a wonderful woman that I can't help but want to marry her. Her forwardness, her clarity, it's incredibly empowering and beautiful. I guess my desire to support her for a lifetime is why I want to marry her. Who knew that the woman I helped on that rainy day would end up being my future partner? Life really is unpredictable. I wonder whether we should have the wedding in France or the US. With these thoughts, we left the cafe together. Later on, we'd get married, were blessed with kids, and true to the phrase mother knows best, I was splendidly under her thumb. But that's a story for a little later. For now, I was thrilled at the prospect of seeing Renee in her wedding dress. You found out, didn't you? Her chuckle echoed from the darkness. It was our first night together. The touch of her skin felt oddly different. Seeing my startled retraction, she laughed. What's happening? I couldn't help my curiosity and asked. She narrowed her eyes at me. Her eyes, cat-like, predatory. Curiosity can be dangerous, she said, slowly revealing her skin. She was truly beautiful then. Even after a decade, I still remember. My name is John Adams. I had just turned 36 at the time. I worked in sales for a pharmaceutical company. Not to boast, but I was their top salesperson. My wife, Catherine, came from a popular family of practitioners. It was a marriage arranged by my father-in-law. Catherine, whom I met at the matchmaking event, seemed like a proper lady. I found no reason to refuse, and so we got married. The higher-ups in the company were pleased about this advantageous connection. It was quite the clue, earning me envy from my peers. After getting married, I threw myself into my work more than ever to drown out the noise. I didn't even imagine that someone who disliked my success was by my side. There are many employees at my level vying for promotions. There are even factions within the upper echelons that aren't visible on the surface. Success depended on standing out in terms of sales and the scale of hospitals I managed, and becoming favored by the influential faction in the upper management. But honestly, I wasn't interested in all that. I simply wanted to help patients through our products. It's not some noble idea. I had a sister who didn't survive childhood cancer. Today, there is a cure for that. She could have been saved. That's why I believe in the power of medicine. I think it's absolutely necessary for people's lives, and I've contributed to patients through it. I was proud of this job and truly loved it. My seemingly smooth sailing future suddenly became clouded. The much-anticipated new medicine, on which we spent a significant amount in development costs, was finally launched. My boss was enthusiastic about making our team the #1 in the nationwide sales of this. He emphasized its early adoption in the hospitals we were responsible for during our sales meetings. The hospitals I was in charge of within my team had the greatest influence. Doctors in this area are reluctant to use new medicine unless they are adopted in the hospitals I'm in charge of. However, there are some doctors who prefer to wait for a certain period before using new ones due to safety considerations. But my boss aggressively pushed sales to the doctors I was in charge of. Turns out, the chief of surgery in this hospital had a close relationship with my boss. I was in charge of the other departments, and my boss was in charge of the surgery department. It seemed like I was in charge, but we were sharing roles as suggested by my boss. My boss urged the chief of surgery to use the new medicine. At that time, frequent wining and dining by pharmaceutical companies was still common, and my boss often went drinking with the chief of surgery, using my entertainment budget. This new drug is a fantastic medication that can be effective even for patients who have not had enough effect with other drugs. Therefore, I really want patients who are struggling to consider using it. However, caution was required when using it. Most drugs have precautions for use. Especially for drugs where side effects are a concern, there can be patients who should absolutely not use them. Surprisingly, my boss did not promote the appropriate use, which could be called the most important mission. As a result, the chief of surgery prescribed the drug to a patient who should never have taken it. The patient suffered from severe side effects. It was a serious incident that went unnoticed in the pharmacy department. I rushed to the hospital as soon as the side effect report came in and collected detailed information after hearing about the case. I was in shock. The patient was someone who should never have been administered the drug, and the prescribing doctor claimed not to have known. I deeply regretted sharing responsibilities with my boss. My boss went pale. This became a major issue within the company. And then, my boss pushed everything onto me. In fact, my name is the one listed as the person in charge of the hospital internally. I followed my boss's instructions to handle the expense reports for the entertainment costs. I was called in by the executives and confronted with documents and receipts. Receipts from lounges and restaurants that I never visited but processed. No matter how many times I explained the situation, the overwhelming amount of evidence made it hard to convince them. My boss was sitting next to the executives, looking smug. However, I knew that it was all a bluff. His trembling fingertips gave him away. I've seen the ugly side of humanity, and I was suddenly sick of the life tied to achievement figures. Facing the accusing executives, I told them that everything was done on my own accord. I declared that I would take responsibility and resign. The room went silent at my forthright demeanor. I wondered if my boss would try to keep me, but he didn't, and I easily quit my job. I had some savings, and I figured I'd manage somehow. That's what I thought. When I got home, Catherine greeted me with a fury in her eyes. Apparently, my father-in-law already contacted her. She reproached me for quitting my job right at the doorstep. She had some documents clenched in her hand. I could instantly guess it was divorce papers. There was something almost laughably meticulous about it. She was ready to part ways swiftly with a husband who no longer held any value. I guess she'd taken some advice from her dad. Everything felt like such a hassle, so I just signed the divorce papers on the spot. The house was a gift to Catherine from her father. "I'll let you know once I decide where I'm going." I left those words behind as I left our home. I knew I wouldn't be coming back, but surprisingly, I didn't feel a trace of regret. If Catherine had shown even a slight hesitation to take the divorce papers, I might have ended up begging her in tears. But Catherine took the divorce papers aggressively, looking at me as if I were trash. All she needed from me was my income and my status. Knowing this, I felt a sense of ironic humor. From the next day, I started looking for a place to live. Being jobless, it was hard to find a realtor who would accommodate me. Even with my income certificate, they were cold to an unemployed man. I was in a tight spot. I decided to ask for help from an old friend. I remembered him working in the real estate industry. My friend was surprised by my situation and amazed at my current state. While dumbfounded, he chuckled, saying, "You've always been like this, haven't you?" He asked me to wait for 3 minutes, and right on the dot, he called back. He'd found an apartment and told me to come immediately. In a hurry, I noted the address and hung up. Following the noted address, I arrived at an old-fashioned Western-styled apartment. The apartment was retro-styled, with one entrance. It seemed rooms were scattered with a corridor in between. There were mailboxes marked with room numbers at the entrance. My friend had mentioned there was a landlord I should talk to. "Excuse me," I called out, as there was no doorbell. I heard the patter of footsteps from the end of the corridor. The person who appeared was a young woman. Her long black hair and porcelain-like white skin were striking. "Oh, are you John? I've heard about you. I'm the landlord, Nancy Thompson. Nice to meet you," she said, offering her right hand. Taken aback, I shook her cool hand. Her wrists and fingers were slender. I was surprised to find myself reluctant to let go of the handshake. Her name was Nancy Thompson. The other people called her Nancy. This apartment that's been converted into apartments is exclusively occupied by women, they told me. There's no need for any deposit or broker's fee, but they asked for my help with the heavy lifting. When I agreed to help out if I could, Nancy said with a laugh, "Well then, consider our deal done." "John, I heard you used to work for a pharmaceutical company," she remarked, offering me the keys. She must have heard from a mutual friend. Yes, I did. I worked there for many years but recently resigned. When I admitted that I was hit with a divorce as soon as I quit my job, Nancy burst into laughter. She seemed genuinely surprised when I confessed that I left my house right after that. "Well, there's nothing wrong with starting over," she said, her smile dazzling me. She seemed unbothered when I promised to find work quickly. And so, my new life began. There were a variety of tenants in these apartments. Students, novelists, and single mothers. There was even a mother who was escaping from an abusive husband. They all seemed to rely on me, which had me shaking with fear, as I lacked confidence in physical strength. They were all amiable people who brushed off my divorce with laughter. I started to learn more about Nancy. She was a 30-year-old widow who had outlived her husband. Apparently, she took over the apartment from her biological father. Her late husband had been a doctor. Small world. I felt like we might have just missed each other at some point. I started working part-time at a local bookstore. I considered getting a full-time job, but I wanted a part-time job that gave me more free time. There was quite a bit of physical labor required at the apartment, so I started doing some simple repairs on my days off. Nancy would occasionally share some of her dinner or bring me bread that she had baked as a hobby. The more we interacted, the more I found myself attracted to her. She casually helped out the other tenants in the apartment. The hallways were always clean, and despite the age of the apartment, it was comfortable living there. She even seemed to help the children of the single mothers with their homework from time to time. Just as I was drawn to her, she seemed to show an interest in me. She asked me about my previous job and often stopped by the bookstore where I worked part-time. It didn't take us long to start having dinner together. As we closed the gap between us, I found myself touching her skin for the first time in the darkness when I stayed at her place for the first time. She looked even more alluring than usual, so stunning that it took my breath away. Her skin was as cool as when I touched her hand that day. There was a strange sensation in her skin, and I instinctively pulled my hand back. Her skin felt too different to be human. Nancy stared at me as I pulled my hand back. Seeing my surprise, she laughed a little. "Sorry, what's going on?" In my flustered state, I lost all my older man's composure and asked her. She just narrowed her eyes and smiled. "Curiosity kills, you know. Are you sure you won't regret this?" She stared me down with eyes as fierce as a wild feline, revealing her skin to me. Upon it, a multitude of surgical scars remained. It must have been a significant injury. The marks on her pale skin almost resembled a flower pattern. The shocking severity of the scars I was seeing for the first time left me speechless, and she peered into my face with a hint of amusement. "I told you you'd regret it, didn't I? You can't touch me." She slowly pointed towards the exit. "Leave this room and regret hurting me." She expelled me from the bed with a cold voice I had never heard before. "What about those scars? Why?" I asked, and Nancy just laughed. Then she began to speak quietly. Nancy's husband used to work as a surgeon at a general hospital. Apparently, he had been unable to perform a surgery that he was supposed to because he was suspected of collusion with a pharmaceutical company. The patient died during the surgery performed by a substitute doctor. Of course, her husband had no involvement with the pharmaceutical company. It was the head of the surgery department who had pinned the blame on him. Taking all responsibility, her husband had to leave his job. After leaving the hospital, he was always down. When he said he was going to go on a hike, which was his hobby, Nancy was relieved. It was winter, but she sent off her experienced husband. That was the last time she saw him alive. He didn't return even after his scheduled descent. After a search, he was found dead in a snow cave. There was no suicide note. Did he go to the snow-capped mountain to end his life, or was it the result of an accident? Feeling responsible for not stopping him, Nancy threw herself off a cliff, apparently trying to follow him. Fortunately, she survived but with significant scars left on her body. "You can't mean the pharmaceutical company is..." I had a gut feeling, and my words got stuck in my throat. "I heard about a scandal caused by a senior colleague from my boss." "That's right. It's the company where you work. They refused my husband, who had asked them many times to prove his innocence," Nancy said with a strained voice. She knew very well that I had nothing to do with it. But she said she despised me just for hearing that I worked in sales for that company. "I thought it's okay for you to get hurt with something you can never have," Nancy said and laughed. She was laughing, but to me, it looked like she was crying. She knew she was being unreasonable. Yet, she still wanted to hurt me, regardless of the logic. Her feelings must have been strong. Nancy still has her deceased husband in her heart. She intends to live on, carrying his regrets. I shudder. Did Nancy draw my attention just for this? I wanted to believe that there were some feelings for me, if only a little bit, otherwise. Thanks for everything so far. I'm leaving tomorrow. I can't stay in this apartment any longer. I decided to leave tomorrow. I took a little break during my long life. My days in the apartment were such peaceful days. That would help if you could do that. I had a slight hope that she might stop me, but she wasn't that kind of person. She turned her back on me, not wanting to see my face anymore. She never looked at my face until the end. The next day, I rushed to the real estate agency from the morning and looked for a new apartment. This time I wasn't unemployed, so I managed to rent a place. I immediately started moving. I didn't have many belongings to begin with, so the move was easy. Once I leave this apartment, I plan to look for a job. My break from life is over. I told them I would quit my bookstore part-time job a month in advance. There's no going back now. I left the apartment as the neighbors saw me off. Since Nancy didn't show her face until the end, I left the keys with one of the tenants. I left a note of thanks for their kindness and decided to leave it with the keys. I wonder if Nancy will read my message. She probably won't read it. I had a feeling. A month later, I found a new job. It's the same sales job as before. I'm selling real estate. I ended up getting a job at that real estate agency. Although I'm learning a lot in a field that's new to me, I'm enjoying every day. And finally, today, I managed to move. My new place is that old apartment building. I've come back to that familiar apartment. I wondered what kind of face you'd make when you came back. Nancy was waiting for me at the entrance, arms crossed. Despite her harsh words, her eyes were calm. I'd like to start over. At my words, Nancy laughed as if she was dumbfounded. When I suggested that we start with introducing ourselves, Nancy wouldn't play along, saying it was silly. After asking a few times, she finally agreed. Even if we start over, it might be the same. If so, we'll start over again. As I responded nonchalantly, Nancy gave a wry smile. I hope that when she finally sorts things out, I'll be right next to her. If she chooses someone else, I will say congratulations to her with all the bravado I can muster. How did you like it? Your subscription to our channel will motivate us. See you in the next video. I was born and raised in New York, but 2 years ago, I moved out of my parents' house and started living alone in the city. If I stayed at home, I don't have to pay rent, and my mom would cook all my meals. Sure, it was easy, but I wanted to stand on my own independence. There is an apartment I chose in a spot where I could get to work on a single train line. No transfers necessary. It's a modest 4-story building with a total of 12 units. The first and second floors cater to singles. The third and fourth floors are geared towards families, and my apartment was a corner one on the second floor. That evening, right after I came back from work, my doorbell rang. Given that the building entrance is secured with an automatic lock, so I thought it must be one of my fellow residents. I'm not exactly chummy with any of them, so I wondered what they might want. When I opened the door, it was a young woman who said she'd just moved into the apartment next door. Oh, she's pretty cute. Opening the door sparked something in me. She was probably around my age. Not too skinny, not too fat, with bright, wide eyes and a quiet demeanor, she struck me as a typical, diligent office worker. Hi, I'm Mary, just moved into 202 next door. Hi, I'm James. She introduced herself, offering me a small paper bag with handles. It was a gift for her new neighbors. Some might wonder, do people in New York still do this, making courtesy visits when they move in? Of course, not everyone does. But some do, indeed. Whether or not they do it, it's up to the individual. There may be differences in first impressions, but I don't judge people based on whether they greet or not. That's the depth of tolerance you find in New York. After we exchanged a simple greeting and she left, I quickly opened the housewarming gift she had brought. Inside was a cookie shaped like a cat. A cat, but it's a cookie. I don't dislike cookies, but I don't particularly enjoy eating them either. I dislike the feeling of crumbs getting stuck in the crevices and contours of my teeth after eating. Still, I appreciated the gift and decided to save it for when I was peckish. Anyway, this new neighbor of mine and I seemed to share quite a few life patterns. Our timings coincided when taking out the trash in the morning and heading to work. Although there were several ways to get to the station, our usual paths overlapped. Our times for returning home in the evening coincided too. We even bumped into each other at the local shopping street on days off. So, we ended up having casual conversations along the way. "Mary, are you by any chance a cat lover?" Why would you say that? I found her overreaction strange and responded, "Well, the cookies you gave me when you moved in, they were shaped like cats." Darn it, oh right. Why did I choose those again? She looked embarrassed and gave a wry smile. On my days off from work, I would either lounge around at home, or at most, head out to the local shopping street or the neighborhood grocery store. One day, while I was waiting at a frequently crossed intersection, a large dog on a walk half stood and clung to my waist. The owner pulled the dog back and apologized to me. But I love dogs, so I was rather pleased. I bent over and gave the dog a hearty pat on its neck. Since then, I looked forward to meeting the dog on its walk at that intersection. The dog would half stand and cling to me as if it was a given when we met. I prepared dog treats, of course, with the owner's permission, and gave them to the dog. The dog would eat the treats I held in my hand. When the dog took the treats, its fluffy fur would tickle my palm. Those few minutes were moments of pure bliss for me. However, one day, Mary happened to pass by while I was frolicking with the dog at the intersection. She must have been very surprised because she was staring at me, halfway recoiling. Even when I greeted her, she remained stiff. I later learned that she wasn't particularly fond or afraid of animals, but she was scared and had a hard time with large dogs. It had been about a month since Mary moved in. That morning, as we were walking together to the station, she said, "People have been clearing their throats at me, clicking their tongues." She was talking about incidents on the escalator. She was originally from Kansas, and it was her first time living outside the Midwest. In the Midwest, when riding escalators, people stand on the right side and leave the left side open. However, in the Northeast, it's the opposite. She had heard about it, but out of habit, she stood on the right side of the escalator, which would earn her some throat clearing and tongue clicking from people behind her. Is the food taste different too? Yes, but New York has everything. Still, she was surprised by the thinness of the 8-slice bread. In the Midwest, even 6-slice bread is considered thin. Speaking of bread, there's the egg sandwich. In the Northeast, the standard is a sandwich with egg salad made from chopped boiled eggs mixed with mayonnaise, but in the Midwest, it's common to sandwich something like an omelet. There are other differences too, like local slangs, abbreviations for famous burger chains, and whether beer sizes are referred to as pint or half pint. Even though she knew these differences intellectually, experiencing them firsthand led to a series of surprises. she shared somewhat bashfully. I enjoyed listening to her stories. I had never left New York except for vacations. So, I assumed that the norms in New York were the norms of America. But I imagined if I were to be transferred to the Midwest or some other region, I would be as bewildered and surprised as she is now. In retrospect, New York is an exceptional place within the country. Of the people living in New York, just over half are native New Yorkers like me. The rest are people who have moved in from other regions. People often say New Yorkers are cold, but if you're referring to people living in New York, nearly half of them are folks who have migrated from other regions. That morning, as usual, I was taking out the trash and about to head to the subway station. She, who normally appears right after me, was surprisingly late. Wondering if she had a different schedule that day, I waited for her a bit. Just then, she came running up, looking rushed. "Good morning. Did you oversleep? Did you wait for me?" she asked, looking apologetic as she disposed of her trash. "I didn't oversleep, but, Luna, I took a little time getting ready." As she said this, she brushed off her navy blue suit skirt. We then, as usual, walked side by side toward the station. I glanced at her shoulder. Numerous thin, short, white hair-like things were there. Because of the navy color, the dust was noticeable. "There's something on your shoulder," I said to her casually. She hastily brushed it off with her hand. Yeah, I was worried about dust on my clothes. That's why I was late getting out." The following weekend, after having lunch at a burger chain with the different acronym she mentioned, I was walking home through the shopping district. There she was, intently reading a flyer or something posted on a light pole. I called out to her from a short distance away. But for some reason, she ignored me and ran off. Puzzled, I watched her leave, then walked up to the pole and looked at the poster she had been engrossed in. It was a flyer for a cat adoption event. I recall her saying she was indifferent to animals. After returning to my apartment, I checked my mailbox and found, mixed in with the junk mail, a notice from the apartment management company. It stated they had received complaints about pet food pouches in the residents' trash, and they were reminding everyone that pets were prohibited in this building. This can't be about me, can it? I remembered that I had given some treats to a large dog I'd met at the crossroads and had brought the empty bag home to throw away. I guessed that someone who saw it might have contacted the management company. The bag was translucent, and I had carelessly thrown it in, so it must have been visible. I bowed my head in apology to the unknown fellow resident for the misunderstanding. However, it wasn't me who had caused a misunderstanding, nor was it someone else. Indeed, someone was keeping a pet in one of the apartments in this building. It was right after this when it came to light. As I returned to my room, I opened the window and leaned out to check the garbage bag I'd left on the balcony. As I lifted the bag, sure enough, through the bag and mixed with the other garbage, the recognizable pouch from the dog treats was plainly visible. At that moment, something caught the corner of my eye. There was a partition board between my balcony and the next rooms. At the bottom of the board, there was a gap about 4 inches high from the floor. There was something gray on the floor in front of that gap. For a moment, I thought it was a dead mouse and I jumped. Then, with trepidation, I took a closer look. Turned out, it was a mouse all right, but a small mouse stuffed animal. Did it fall from the balcony above? As I reached down to pick up the stuffed mouse, I noticed something moving in and out of the gap in the partition. What is this? It was a soft, stick-like object covered in pale fur. When I tried to get a closer look by bringing my face near, it quickly retracted, and when I gave up and pulled my face away, it came out again. It wasn't just moving in and out, either. The tip of it was beckoning, as if trying to retrieve something. I initially thought it was one stick, but it was actually two. Then I noticed the paw pads. It was a cat's paw. It probably had been playing with the mouse stuffed animal on the neighboring balcony and had accidentally pushed it onto mine. It was trying to retrieve it. I pushed the mouse stuffed animal back toward the gap at the bottom of the partition. Immediately, the cat's paw pounced and retracted, clutching the stuffed animal. "Good for you, kitty. You got your toy back." For a while, I was grinning to myself, picturing the cat probably playing ecstatically with the reclaimed stuffed mouse. Then, I suddenly snapped back to reality. Next door was her apartment. Why would there be a cat in her place? All right, the dust on her navy blue suit when she came over, it was cat hair. She must have a cat, there's no doubt about it. Even though this apartment complex doesn't allow pets. This was not something I could ignore. I immediately went to visit her next door. When I rang the doorbell, she cracked open the door and peeked out. As she asked what the matter was, I shoved a notice from the management company in front of her nose. "Did you see this? It was in your mailbox, wasn't it?" Yes, I saw it, but..." She was clearly flustered. "Is this your cat, perhaps, Mary?" No, not at all." She was grimacing. "Then why was there a cat on your balcony? I saw it, just now." Could it have been a mistake? Maybe. Her face was pale. I peered over her shoulder into the room. But there was no sign of a cat. Then it happened. She let out a little gasp and lifted one foot. I looked down at her feet. "So, who's this?" A cat sat at her feet, its head resting on its front paws. The cat looked up at me as if to plead not to torment her. Then, she picked up the cat and invited me into the room. When I walked further into the room, she put the cat down on the floor and headed to the kitchen to make tea. "Yes, she's mine. Her name is Luna." Whiskers stayed where she was put down, sprawling on the floor. Once she made tea for me and herself, she sat down at the table, gave some fresh water to Luna next to her, and turned to me. As I took a sip of tea, Luna staggered to her feet and began to drink water too. She looked down at Luna and said, "I found her when she was a kitten. I was in kindergarten at the time, so she's already 18 years old or maybe even older, a real old lady." She said they were like sisters, growing up together because she was an only child. She has lived a long life, but I wonder how many more years, or months, or weeks. No, how many more days we can be together. She was born and raised in Kansas, her hometown, graduated from a local community college, and got a job at a local company through her father's connections. But she couldn't give up her longing for New York, so she applied to a job posting by a company in New York and was luckily hired mid-career. She decided to move to New York, but had to find a place to live on her own. She sought advice from friends and searched online for housing. Finding a place was difficult, she admitted, especially without any familiarity with New York. In her apartment search, she couldn't find a place that met her requirements like location, budget, and pet friendliness. Her start date was fixed and she didn't have much time. She chose this apartment, mainly because it seemed convenient for commuting. She considered leaving her cat behind since pets were prohibited in the apartment. But you ended up bringing her anyway, not knowing how many more days you could spend together. She bowed her head at my words. As I watched her, I remembered my own childhood. My family home was in an old residential neighborhood in the heart of New York, lined with aging single-family homes. Even as a child, I could peer over the fences of our neighbors' homes. Back then, an elderly couple lived next door. They were always very kind to me. They had a dog that they kept in their yard. The dog was friendly towards me. We often played over the fence, and sometimes I even took it for walks. It was in the fall when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade. The old couple next door decided to move in with their son due to their old age. I was just a kid, but I felt sad thinking about saying goodbye to the dog. And so, it was the eve of the old couple's move. Due to a typhoon, heavy rain was falling outside. The wind was so strong that the glass on the porch was shaking and making noise. I went to the porch to check the outside. Then I noticed a different noise, not from the wind, but something hitting the glass. I looked down. There, soaked to the skin, was the neighbor's dog, batting at the glass door with its paws. I quickly opened the glass door. The dog leapt out at me. It then licked my face all over. Rain mercilessly invaded the porch. My mother noticed and told me to close the glass door. Ignoring my mother's words, I took off my t-shirt and used it as a towel, wiping the wet body of the dog. No matter how much I wiped, the rain kept pouring on. Looking back now, I still wonder. How did the dog, who should have been tied to its doghouse, got free and came to me? All I know for sure is that night, that dog came to say goodbye to me. And it hurted to say goodbye to that dog. She stayed still, with her head bowed. I couldn't bring myself to blame her, and I was at a loss for what to do. Then, Luna seemed to climb onto my lap where I was sitting in the chair, twisting her upper body onto her back and rubbing her head against me. I restrained her when she hastily tried to pick up Luna. "Maybe she's telling you not to beat yourself up anymore," I said. Upon hearing this, she covered her face with both hands and broke down crying on the spot. She said she never had any intention of hiding the fact that she had a cat and staying in this apartment for a long time. However, there were plenty of things she was still trying to get used to in her workplace and in her new life in a city like New York. She said she would look for another property where she could live with her cat whenever she had the time, but with no familiarity with the area and no knowledge of average rents, she couldn't find one. If I were the landlord of this place, I thought, I might have said, "If that's the situation, I'll give you a bit of a reprieve," but I didn't think it would go that well. These days, the world tends to adhere strictly to rules, or rather, there's no room for leniency. So, I told her that it would be bad to keep Luna in a pet-prohibited apartment, but we should keep it a secret for a while. And I decided to help her look for a new apartment. However, the situation drastically changed within 3 days. It was right after I came home. The doorbell was rung persistently, as if waiting for my return. When I went to see, she was standing there, large tears streaming down her face. When I dropped my gaze slightly from her face, Luna, no longer moving, was in her arms. When I came back home, she usually comes to greet me at the entrance. I thought it was strange. And then, I found her, on the sofa. As she said this, she crumbled to the floor, crying loudly, still holding Luna in her arms. "I'm sorry, Luna, I was foolish." I searched for words to say to her, but couldn't find any. So, instead of words, I hugged her, gently rubbing her back as I did so. Several weeks after that, we started looking for a place to live together. "This place is pet-friendly," I said, having found a pet-friendly property by chance and mentioning it out of interest. "But I don't." She pulled out her smartphone with a somewhat distant look in her eyes. On the lock screen of her smartphone was Luna, who looked like she was smiling gently. Looking at Luna on her phone, she turned to me and gave a wistful smile. "That's right. What about this one? Doesn't it look like a decent place?" "Indeed, it does. How did you like today's story?" Your subscriptions and likes really help motivate us in our production work. We look forward to reading your comments. Until the next video, take care. My name's Sam Baker. I'm a single 33-year-old man, working for a medical equipment manufacturer. I've just moved back to the head office from our regional branch after 10 years. My boss, Director Johnson, was very happy to welcome me back. "Sam, congratulations on returning to the head office. Today's on me. Drink as much as you want," he said, patting me on the shoulder with a beer mug in his hand. He invited me out for a drink, partly to celebrate my return to the head office. "Thank you, but the fact I didn't let myself get down and worked hard in the regional office is also thanks to you, Director." This wasn't mere flattery, but a simple fact. About a year after I started working at this company, the then director ordered me to suddenly start working at the regional branch. Back then, Mr. Johnson was just a manager. It seemed the director at that time didn't like me because I was too quiet and boring. That's why I ended up being sent to the regional office, which was just short on staff. I was afraid I might never be able to return to the head office. Mr. Johnson, seeing my anxiety, reassured me with kind words. Believe it or not, I was also sent to the regional office from the head office in the past. I was depressed at first, thinking I had been driven out because I was unnecessary here. But you know what? It was the results I produced there that got me to where I am today. I want you to believe that this personnel change isn't a demotion. It's a personnel change to rebuild the regional branch. I need your help, Sam. So don't get discouraged. Just do your best at the regional branch for now. His words were more encouraging than I could ever explain. I was disheartened when the personnel change was announced, but thanks to Johnson, I was able to face forward and push on. Even after I moved to the regional branch, I sought advice from Director Johnson and pushed myself harder. As a result, the branch's performance greatly improved, and now I'm finally back at the head office. Since the previous director has also been transferred to another department, I'll start afresh and work hard at the head office. While we were happily chatting about our reunion, Johnson suddenly said something unexpected. "Sam, would you consider having a dinner date with my daughter, if you're okay with it?" "Wait, your daughter?" The moment I heard the word dinner date, I froze. Truth is, I've never had a girlfriend in my life. I appreciate the offer, but as you know, Director, I'm not exactly a social butterfly. I've never even had a relationship with a woman. I'm afraid your daughter might find me unsuitable. But Mr. Johnson gently reassured me. That's not true at all. Compared to 10 years ago, Sam, you're a completely different person. You've grown through your struggles in the regional branch, and you communicate smoothly now. I highly value that part of you. That's what I thought of introducing you to my daughter, and I believe you two would be compatible in terms of personality. It's just a casual dinner to meet each other, so don't worry. I had no idea that Mr. Johnson thought so highly of me. I was moved by his words and ended up accepting his invitation for a dinner date. Mr. Johnson showed me a photo of his daughter on his phone, and she was stunningly beautiful. But after the drinks were over and I was on my way home, I was already regretting my decision. I can't possibly handle a relationship. I never shared this with my boss, but I actually have a traumatic experience related to romance. Let's go back in time, 16 years ago. When I was 17, my mom ran off with her lover to some faraway place. The shock of my mom's disappearance hit me hard, but the bad news didn't stop there. My dad, angry and feeling betrayed by my mom, started taking it out on me. "Your mother left us because she couldn't stand you. You'll live a lonely life, unloved by anyone," he ranted, drowning his sorrows in booze. I think seeing my face, which resembled my mother's, must have pissed him off. I didn't have any notable skills or talents. Perhaps I lacked the charm as a child to keep my mom from leaving my dad. His harsh words hurt me deeply, and my introverted personality grew stronger. From then on, my dad's drinking got worse. He left all the house chores to me, and he'd quickly resort to violence when something displeased him. I had to do all the housework perfectly to avoid my father's anger, and before I knew it, I started being late to school more frequently. Constant tardiness, a destructive home environment, and the negative aura surrounding me led me to isolate myself from everyone around me. I started to feel uncomfortable in my own class and began to seek refuge in the school nurse's office. The school nurse, Ms. Miller, was very kind and would always listen attentively to my stories. Although I couldn't share everything considering my father's situation, the mere presence of Ms. Miller, who would lend me her time and ears, was a relief to me. You can tell me anything that's bothering you regarding your studies. It's for your own good that you should strive to pass your courses. Once you can stand on your own, you'll be able to get away from your father sooner. And she was absolutely right. If I kept this up, I wouldn't be able to graduate. So, I committed myself to attend all my classes, and I spent the rest of my time seeking refuge in the nurse's office. I started to get a handle on my house chores and stopped being late, narrowly avoiding repeating a year. Amidst this lifestyle, another reason emerged for me to frequent the nurse's office. There was another student, a girl, who also spent time there, and I quietly looked forward to my interactions with her. Her name was Emily Brown, and she was a grade below me. "Good morning, Sam." She'd greet me with a smile every morning I visited the nurse's office. I was happy to see her, so I always smiled back and replied, "Good morning." Emily often said, "I'm basically homeschooled in the nurse's office." She rarely went to her actual class, spending most of her day in the nurse's office instead. This was due to Emily's appearance. She always wore a wrinkled uniform, hid her face behind long bangs, and had a simple style with her long hair tied back. Because of this, Emily was often called unkempt and was generally avoided by everyone else. However, it wasn't that Emily was lazy. The root of the issue lay in her home environment. Her parents favored her older sister and were always harsh towards Emily. Because of this, she seldom got new clothes or everyday essentials, and she couldn't afford to go to a hair salon, hence her appearance. Despite all of this, I thought Emily was a wonderful girl. I borrowed a really interesting book from the library yesterday. "It's such a blessing to have these wonderful books available to us," she'd say with a smile. Seeing Emily speak like this gave me a boost of energy. Despite being placed in a seemingly insurmountable situation, she always maintained a positive attitude, constantly looking for things to enjoy. While everyone else was focusing on Emily's appearance, I noticed her beautiful eyes peeking from behind her long bangs. Clear and beautiful light brown eyes. My heart pounded every time I saw that sparkle, and our conversations became my solace as I barely survived my harsh school life. Looking back now, I guess that was my first love. But despite my feelings, one day, suddenly, Emily disappeared. She had transferred schools without saying a word. When I asked the teachers about her disappearance, due to privacy reasons, they couldn't tell me anything. I thought of her as a companion, someone who used to visit the school nurse with me. I never expected such a sudden farewell. Just like when my mother suddenly disappeared, everyone seems to leave me behind. After that, I somehow managed to graduate high school, and with the help of scholarships, I moved on to a distant university. That's how I finally got away from my father. But no matter how much time passed, since Emily's departure, I had never fallen in love with anyone else. I couldn't forget about Emily, and the fear of getting hurt kept me from entering into any romantic relationship. Therefore, I felt sorry for my boss, but I wasn't sure the dinner date he set up for me would go well. On the day of the dinner date, at the private room of the restaurant where we agreed to meet, a woman more beautiful than the one I saw on my boss's cell phone appeared, and I was taken aback. "Nice to meet you, I'm Emily." The boss's daughter introduced herself, bowing politely. "Nice to meet you, I hope we have a good day today." Emily, with her beautiful fair skin, was elegantly dressed in a monochrome dress. As her smooth chestnut hair swayed, radiating a lovely aura, my heart raced. I felt an uncanny connection knowing her name was Emily. Apparently, I seemed to have a strong connection to that name. The dinner date was nerve-wracking, but since we both loved reading, the conversation flowed better than I expected. "Sam, you like reading too. I often visit the library on my days off. Really? Any recent book recommendations? When I asked, Emily gave a clear explanation about her recommended books. Seeing her talk so passionately and with a smile, I was taken in by her charm. Who knew I could enjoy such a pleasant time with a woman? However, at some point, Emily suddenly fell silent with a cryptic look on her face. Did I say something wrong? Feeling uneasy, I asked, "Is something wrong?" She fixed her gaze on me and said, "Good heavens, it's time you noticed." Saying this, she lifted the sleeve of her dress, revealing a bracelet made of black gemstones. The moment I saw that bracelet, I let out a small "ah," as a memory from 16 years ago came flooding back. That day, I headed to the school's nurse's office as usual during lunch break. The nurse, Ms. Miller, must have gone to the restroom because her seat was empty and there was no one in the office. However, at that moment, a gust of wind blew in from the window, causing the curtains on the infirmary bed to flutter, and I witnessed an astonishing sight. What? Through the gap in the curtains, I saw Emily on the bed, holding a large number of black-pole-like objects in her hand. She was staring intently at the pills on the table attached to the bed. Was she planning to swallow those? No matter what medication it was, consuming it all at once would surely harm her health. Emily, unable to stay still, I barged through the curtain and rushed to the bed. "Sam, what's going on?" Surprised at my sudden appearance, I grabbed Emily's shoulders and blurted out, "Don't jump the gun. We're still young. No matter how hard things are now, if we keep living, good things will happen. I don't want you to disappear, Emily." As I said this, I realized that I was crying. I didn't want to lose Emily. My emotions were so strong that I naturally burst into tears. However, in contrast to my panic, Emily was calm. "What on earth are you talking about? I'm just making a bracelet with stones I got from the library's teacher." What? It turned out that the items Emily had were not pearls, but gemstones. Knowing my misunderstanding, Emily laughed out loud. Feeling embarrassed about my overreaction, I blushed. Then, Emily handed me a bracelet with a cheerful smile. "This Morian stone is said to protect from unpleasant things. I already have one, so I'll give one to you, Sam." "Really? Oh, thank you." I never expected to receive a gift from Emily, and I was genuinely happy. "Yes, because you're my important nurse's room buddy, Sam. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." Despite saying that, Emily disappeared without a trace. And now, that same Emily is right before my eyes. Unconsciously, my eyes filling with tears, I pulled out a black Morian bracelet from my suit pocket. It's been 16 years since then. I have been wearing it without fail. Before I knew it, my eyes too were moistened, just like her beautiful hazel eyes. I'm sorry for transferring schools so abruptly, but there was a profound reason behind it. According to her, her parents had been violent towards her, and feeling threatened because of their escalated behavior, she had run away from home. Emily's mother's brother was, in fact, Mr. Johnson, who was the director. The two of them were uncle and niece. And Emily had gone to ask for help from her uncle, who lived in the neighboring state. The director, who had always been worried about Emily, thought that he could no longer leave her with her parents, severed ties with his sister, and adopted Emily. And so Emily's last name changed from Brown to Johnson. Hearing about Emily's tragic past, my heart ached. It's understandable why she had to transfer schools abruptly. Emily, wiping her tears, began to speak. "I haven't been able to forget about you since then. So when my father brought me a marriage proposal, I was really surprised. I recognized your unique last name immediately. It was unmistakably you, Sam. I'm honestly so happy. I was a mess in high school, wasn't I? I knew it and I was so embarrassed. That's why I couldn't express my feelings back then. I knew that even someone as kind as you, Sam, couldn't possibly like someone like me." Listening to Emily's words, I was astonished. I couldn't believe she had felt the same way about me. I, too, was in love with Emily, but I always thought that no woman would ever like me. But now, I think I've improved my appearance a bit. So please let me say this, I like you, Sam. Emily, don't belittle yourself like that. I've always loved you. Then and now, to me, you are always beautiful." I had to let her know that, even before she finished her sentence. It wasn't just about loving her now. For me, Emily had always been someone special. Hearing my words, Emily blushed and cried. I could tell that those were not tears of sadness. "Thank you. Despite the hardships I had in high school, I managed to get through those days because of you, Sam." We held each other's hands on the table, waiting for our tears to stop. Everyone seemed to leave me, but Emily kept her promise. She came back to me. I felt deeply that this truth washed away my hurtful past, with tears. After a year of dating, we decided to get married. Upon learning that we knew each other from the beginning, Mr. Johnson, the director, was very surprised. I was shocked. "I had no idea that you two knew each other, but I am really grateful to you, Sam. Emily was wounded in high school, but thanks to you, she was able to recover." As he spoke, he gazed into the distance, as if reminiscing about the past. "My wife and I had some issues, and we couldn't have children. That's also why I've always thought of Emily as my own daughter." Not being able to have children must have been hard for Mr. Johnson at that time. But it was clear to me that he and his wife truly cared for Emily, even though she wasn't their own. Emily said she was truly happy to become your adopted daughter. "I believe that the reason she can smile like this now is because of you. When you say that, it makes me happy. I always wanted her to be happy after all the suffering she's been through. But I believe that you will certainly make my daughter happy, Sam." With that, Mr. Johnson blushed and laughed shyly. "That's right. By marrying her, I would also become Mr. Johnson's son." With a big smile on my face, I nodded vigorously. "Of course, I will start calling you my father-in-law." "Ha ha, I can't believe I'm getting a son as well as a daughter. It feels like a dream." It's possible that each of our past experiences might have been dark and sad. Still, it was through irreplaceable encounters that we were able to know the joy of loving and being loved. While savoring such happiness, I looked forward to a future filled with hope.